Imagine living in a time when dating wasn't just about finding someone you click with over coffee. It was about alliances, survival, and sometimes, duty. Where love wasn't even on the table, and your first date was a marriage contract signed by your parents. Sounds like something out of a historical drama, right? Well, buckle up, because we're diving into the world of medieval dating, a world where marriage wasn't just about falling in love. It was about securing your family's future, your wealth, and your place in society. Forget about romantic strolls in the park or dinner at your favorite restaurant. In the medieval era, romance was often a luxury, and the rules of dating? Well, they were far from what we know today. If you wanted someone's heart, or even just their hand in marriage, you needed to go through their father, possibly never meeting them until your wedding day. You didn't just ask someone out, you entered a contract, one that could shape the fate of entire kingdoms. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a place where till death do us part was a much shorter promise than you'd expect. In fact, you wouldn't even survive long enough to see that vow play out. So, let's dive into why surviving a marriage back then was like playing the world's worst game of Survivor. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more deep dives into the brutal and bizarre history of the Middle Ages. To understand medieval dating and marriage, we have to first understand medieval society. Picture a world where class divisions are rigid, religion dominates daily life, and the idea of marrying for love would have been laughed at. In this world, marriage wasn't about finding someone you liked or connected with. It was about securing alliances, consolidating wealth, and ensuring the survival of your family. Love? That was often seen as a bonus, not the point. For nobles, marriage was a political tool. Take, for example, Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in medieval Europe. In 1137, Eleanor married Louis VII of France, not because of romantic love, but to secure alliances for both their kingdoms. This marriage allowed her family to expand its influence. When that marriage ended in divorce, Eleanor remarried Henry II of England, cementing her power even further. It wasn't about love, it was about survival, influence, and maintaining power. For peasants, it wasn't much different. They may have had less land to offer, but marriage still served the same purpose. The main goal was to produce children to help with work, secure a bit of land, and ensure the continuation of the family line. There was little room for romance in this world. Marriage was about stability that would carry you through the harsh realities of medieval life. One aspect of medieval marriage that stands out to us today is the incredibly young age at which people were expected to marry. It wasn't unusual for girls to be betrothed as young as 12 or 13 years old, and boys weren't much older. In fact, in many cases, marriages were arranged well before either party had the chance to understand what dating even meant. Why so young? Well, in medieval times, life expectancy was much shorter, and people were expected to marry and start families as soon as possible to ensure the survival of the family line. Young women were often seen as ready for marriage as soon as they hit puberty, while young men, typically a few years older, were expected to take on the responsibilities of managing a household and supporting a family. But even more than this, early marriages were seen as a way to solidify alliances, before anyone else could swoop in. Take the example of Margaret of Scotland, who was married to King Malcolm III of Scotland when she was just around 12 years old. The marriage was politically motivated, meant to strengthen the alliance between Scotland and England. Margaret, like many girls of her time, didn't have a choice. Her marriage was arranged before she even reached adulthood, let alone understanding what being a wife entailed. While today, we consider someone in their teens still to be a child, in the medieval world, your adulthood was marked by your ability to reproduce and secure the next generation. Marriage at such a young age was not only common, but expected. For many women, the idea of love was as distant as their new husband's kingdom. Marriage was about survival, not romance. Now, when it comes to actual courtship, things were formal, and I mean formal. If you were a noblewoman, you didn't just go on a date to the tavern or have a quiet stroll through the gardens. No, the rules were rigid, the rituals intricate, and the stakes were high. A knight or suitor wanting to win your favor would have to prove his worth, often through public acts of valor. This could mean a jousting tournament, a knightly quest, or the exchange of lavish gifts to show that he was worthy of your hand. Imagine being a noblewoman in a grand hall, surrounded by your family, and your suitor, with everything on the line, challenges a fellow knight to a joust, just to win your favor. And if he failed? Well, that was it. He'd be sent packing, and the family would move on to another suitor. But if he won? He might just get to share a few minutes with you in private to discuss a potential marriage, with every word being carefully watched and every move scrutinized by your chaperones. Religion played a massive role in medieval life, and that extended to marriage. If a suitor wanted to marry you, the church had to approve it. No priest's blessing, no marriage. While today, you can marry with little more than a civil ceremony or a private vow, in the medieval period, the church was the gatekeeper of all things matrimonial. Your union had to be sanctified by the church to be considered legitimate. The church didn't just officiate weddings, they set the rules. The church decreed when you could marry, who you could marry, and even how many times you could marry. A widow had to wait a certain amount of time before remarrying, and sometimes, even those dates were dictated by religious calendars. Love, as we think of it, was secondary. What mattered more was whether your marriage would bring you closer to God and serve your family's needs. Social class was the backbone of medieval society, and it was also the backbone of medieval marriage. If you were born a noble, you didn't marry a peasant. And if you were born a peasant, forget about marrying into the nobility. Marriages were arranged within social class boundaries, ensuring that wealth and power stayed within the same circles. A noblewoman would never marry a commoner, and vice versa. Such a marriage was not just rare, it was scandalous. For the nobility, a marriage was about securing your family's place in the world. If a nobleman fell in love with a commoner, the consequences were dire. The marriage would likely be annulled, and both the man and the woman would face public ridicule and social rejection. This rigid class structure was cemented into the very fabric of medieval courtship and marriage. Let's talk about dowries. Because in medieval times, a wedding was not just a celebration of love, it was a transaction. A dowry was an essential part of any marriage arrangement. It wasn't just a token gift or a family heirloom. No, a dowry was often the wealth, land, or goods that the bride's family gave to the groom's family. It was seen as a way of ensuring the groom's commitment to the union. In noble circles, a dowry could mean land or even a military force. This was a substantial part of the marriage contract, and for many women, their dowry was all they had to offer. For men, a marriage without a dowry was a poor match. While today's engagements might come with a simple ring, in medieval times, a marriage came with an army. Now, here's an essential but often overlooked aspect of medieval marriage: consummation. In many ways, marriage wasn't considered fully legitimate unless the marriage was consummated. The wedding night was extremely important. This was the moment when the union became real in the eyes of both society and the church. If a couple didn't consummate their marriage, it could be grounds for annulment. A marriage might be considered invalid if the couple did not have sexual intercourse, and the bride could be sent back to her family. This meant that even after all the elaborate ceremonies and the political and familial obligations, the marriage could still fall apart if the consummation didn't happen. In the case of royals and nobles, this was especially critical, as the union's primary purpose was often to produce heirs. Medieval dating was about family, wealth, and power. Romance was often secondary, and marriage was a contract, not a celebration of affection. From the role of religion to the pressure of dowries, the importance of consummation, and rigid class structures, everything was shaped by the social and political realities of the time. Today, we are lucky enough to have the freedom to choose our partners based on love, but sometimes it's worth remembering how far we've come in terms of personal freedom in relationships. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. Subscribe for more historical insights, and let us know in the comments, would you trade today's freedom for medieval marriage arrangements?